In 323 BC, Alexander the Great suddenly died in Babylon. Since he didn't designate an heir before his death, it took over 40 years for his successors to complete the division of his vast empire. From 323 BC to 281 BC, the successors used plots, battles, dynastic marriages, and intrigue to establish a new world map, ushering in the most brilliant period of ancient Greek history, the Hellenistic era. The territory of Alexander's empire included Greece proper, North Africa, Asia Minor, the Iranian Plateau, and the Indus Valley, making it the largest empire ever known at that time. However, in 323 BC, Alexander died without naming an heir. At this point, his direct heirs with claim to succession were only his unborn son, little Alexander, and a half-brother named Philip who had some mental issues. Both of them were rather weak. On the other hand, the generals who fought alongside Alexander were all in their prime, holding significant military power. Thus, a game over control of the empire's inheritance began. Let us first get to know some important figures among these successors. First is Perdiccas, a member of the Macedonian royal family and Alexander, second in command after his close friend Hephaestion died. Then there is Ptolemy, from a noble Macedonian family, but not part of the royal lineage. He was Alexander's childhood friend, who studied under Aristotle alongside him and grew up in Philip II's court. Next is Antipater, also from a Macedonian noble background, who served as regent during Alexander's father Philip II's reign. He had the longest service record but fell out with Alexander later on. His son Cassander came to Babylon to plead for his father, but was beaten by Alexander and left with psychological trauma. Coincidentally, not long after that, Alexander died. There are rumors that Cassander poisoned him, though this is not true. Then there is Antigonus and Lysimachus, who were not from Macedonian nobility, but held important positions in the court and military under Alexander. Lastly, Seleucus stands out as he was not part of Alexander's inner circle like the others. However, he was still a significant general under Alexander. That is it for some key figures among the successors. When I introduce how these successors divided their first slice of cake, we'll see how things unfolded. Perdiccas, being second in command, naturally took charge during the division ceremony in 323 BC and established a central government with himself at its core. Although nominally recognizing Alexander's mentally ill brother Philip III and his unborn son little Alexander as co-rulers while he was regent, he essentially held all power. Other generals also received their own territories and became provincial governors. Ptolemy got Egypt, Antigonus had Asia Minor, Lysimachus governed Thrace, and Antipater controlled mainland Greece. The specifics of the division can be seen in this diagram. I won't go into detail here. However, Perdiccas' ambitions didn't stop there. He attempted to marry Alexander's sister Cleopatra for royal legitimacy, while secretly weakening the power of provincial governors. His intentions were clear and obvious, almost written on his face. This disrupted the delicate balance among successors. The first one to challenge Perdiccas was Ptolemy, then governor of Egypt. According to Perdiccas' plan, Alexander's body should have been buried in Macedonia, but Ptolemy secretly moved it to Egypt instead. In 321 BC, Perdiccas marched south to Egypt to confront Ptolemy. Unfortunately for him, when he led his main force across a branch of the Nile to attack Memphis, flooding occurred, causing many soldiers to be swept away by water. Meanwhile, Ptolemy's forces successfully defended and counterattacked, shaking enemy morale. Seeing Perdiccas' ineffectiveness, three of his generals, Seleucus, Paethon, and Antigenes, staged a coup in 320 BC and killed him. At just 30 years old, Perdiccas died before fully implementing his empire's reorganization plan due to military failure. After Perdiccas' death, the successors met again to redistribute power. This time, Antipater became regent while Ptolemy remained in Egypt. The three generals who assassinated Perdiccas, Seleucus, Paethon, and Antigenes, also received territories. Seleucus was appointed governor of Babylon, Paethon got Elam, and Antigenes continued as governor of Media. However, this new balance lasted only a year. In 319 BC, the elderly regent Antipater suddenly died. Even more surprisingly, he didn't pass power to his son Cassander, but instead chose an old loyalist named Polysperchon to be the new regent. Cassander was naturally unhappy about this. "You old man, when I went to Babylon to speak for you, and so Alexander had him by the hair and beat the living daylights out of him. You traitor, you are siding with outsiders. Passing on the regency to someone else is unforgivable." So Cassander allied himself with Ptolemy, governor of Egypt, Antigonus, governor of Asia Minor, Lysimachus, governor of Thrace, and others to overthrow this glass bead hole. Cassander also got support from Queen Eurydice, wife of the puppet king Philip III. Eurydice was a wild female politician who won over the royal army through her oratory, in an era where women couldn't even appear publicly in Greece. During Perdiccas' absence and Antipater's death, she ruled Macedonia under the name of Philip III, making her essentially a regent as well. Thus Cassander and Polysperchon were rivals, both controlling kings to rule over others, so Eurydice sided with Cassander and in 317 BC named him legal regent in Philip III's second. This marked the start of war between Cassander's camp, puppet king being Philip III, and Polysperchon, puppet king being Alexander IV. With Ptolemy, Antigonus' support, Cassander quickly gained ground in Greece, capturing Athens and other strongholds. Seeing this, Polysperchon took Alexander IV to his grandmother Olympias for help, as Alexander was her grandson and Philip III, a bastard son of her husband by another woman. She naturally sided with Alexander and thus Polysperchon's camp. She sent an army to Macedonia along with Polysperchon. Meanwhile, Eurydice had gathered troops in Macedonia to resist Polysperchon, but unexpectedly, soldiers laid down arms at the site of Olympias, so Cassander and Philip III were captured and killed by Olympias. Cassander then besieged Olympias for a year before winning in 316 BC. He imprisoned Alexander IV and Roxana and executed Olympias. Coincidentally, Polysperchon's ally Eumenes was defeated that same year in Asia Minor. Appointed as commander of the Asian army by Polysperchon, Eumenes tried to consolidate power in Mesopotamia and Iran plateau, but Antigonus outmaneuvered him, winning over all governors including Seleucus and Python, before Eumenes could. Using superior tactics and diplomacy, Antigonus defeated Eumenes, who was executed. Cassander's camp thus emerged victorious while Polysperchon's collapsed. Polysperchon fled to the Peloponnese, leaving Macedonia and Greece under Cassander's control. With Polysperchon out of the picture, the empire looked like this now. From this map it is clear that Antigonus, who defeated Eumenes and controlled all of Asia Minor, was the most powerful governor in the empire. Such a situation could last long, as Antigonus was arrogant, declaring himself governor of Asia, minting coins, stationing troops, acting like a king, aiming to unify the world. This alarmed other governors. At this time, Seleucus quarreled with Antigonus and fled to Egypt, losing his territory to Antigonus. So Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus formed an alliance against Antigonus, demanding he return Seleucus' governorship. Thus began the war between Antigonus and the Antigonus coalition. In 314 BC, Antigonus posed as a democrat, with his son Demetrius leading an army to liberate Greece, under the guise of freeing Greek states from Macedonian rule. These states were unhappy with Macedonia's control and sided with Antigonus, causing Cassander's retreat north. But soon, the coalition struck back. In 312 BC, Ptolemy and Seleucus marched from Egypt into Syria, controlled by Antigonus, capturing coastal strongholds. Meanwhile, Antigonus was still battling Cassander in Macedonia, sending Demetrius a large army and advisors to defend Syria as practice for his son. But the old fox Ptolemy and Seleucus swiftly captured Syrian strongholds and defeated Demetrius at Gaza. Though casualties were low, most infantry surrendered to Ptolemy. Young Demetrius fled back to Asia Minor in disgrace, while Ptolemy and Seleucus controlled southern Syria. Then Ptolemy fortified the Syrian coast, protecting Egypt, while Seleucus advanced east across Euphrates into Babylon, unopposed, reclaiming his kingdom easily. Seeing this is where the concentration of forces to recapture Syria began. He drove Ptolemy back to Egypt, but because he was in Greece and Asia Minor, his victories there were not yet stable, so when he turned towards Syria, Lysimachus invaded Asia Minor from Thrace, and Cassander regained control over parts of Greece. Thus, for Antigonus, the war became a game of whack-a-mole. Since his enemies were fighting on multiple fronts, he could never finish them off. As soon as he dealt with one, another would pop up. However, the Allied camp clearly didn't have the capability to dismantle Antigonus either, so the war entered a stalemate where no side could win. For Antigonus, Seleucus restoring his kingdom was the most unbearable thing, but if he wanted to focus on dealing with Seleucus, he had to avoid fighting on two fronts at once. So in 311 BC, Antigonus finally sat down at the negotiating table with Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus, reaching a ceasefire agreement. The agreement stipulated that Antigonus would continue controlling Asia, Ptolemy would keep Egypt, Lysimachus would remain as governor of Thrace, and Cassander would stay as regent of Macedonia until Alexander IV came of age. Both sides agreed to stop fighting and not interfere with each other's territories. The agreement signed by the alliance recognized Antigonus' rule over Asia, effectively betraying Seleucus. Since they couldn't gain anything from it anymore, they would help him against Antigonus. He would have to deal with Antigonus on his own. Now that we've reached this point in the story, many people might think Seleucus is done for now. Antigonus will surely turn around and crush him. However, the plot took a 180-degree turn. Without support from allies, Seleucus didn't give up but quickly gathered a large army in Asia and began expanding rapidly, reaching as far as the Indus River Valley, where he signed a treaty with the Indian Maurya dynasty to acquire 500 war elephants. By the time Antigonus turned his attention back towards him, half of Asia was already under Seleucus' control. Antigonus and his son Demetrius were naturally quick to mobilize their forces for an attack. They engaged in several fierce battles in Mesopotamia. Although Antigonus managed to recapture some cities, he could never completely eliminate Seleucus' influence. Ultimately, Antigonus was forced to accept that Seleucus controlled Eastern Asia. It is clear that the ceasefire agreement of 311 BC was merely a delaying tactic. In fact, no one was satisfied with how the cake was divided this time around, so after signing the agreement, each side went back to fortifying their territories and rebuilding their armies. Antigonus still dreamed of defeating all the successors and unifying the world under his rule. Ptolemy wanted to expand into Syria's coastal regions. Cassander aimed to become king openly and began making a series of legitimacy moves. First, in order to connect with the Macedonian royal family, Cassander married Alexander's half-sister Thessalonica. He named a city after her, which is today second largest city in Greece, Thessaloniki. Then, since young Alexander would no longer be able to serve as regent once he came of age, Cassander made the decision to kill him and his mother Roxane so that they could never reach adulthood. In 310 BC, both young Alexander and Roxane were killed by Cassander, effectively wiping out the entire line of Alexander the Great. In 308 BC, after 3 years of rebuilding, the successors decided once again to get back into the fight. As usual, Antigonus was the first to start stirring things up, targeting Cassander, this time under the pretext of liberating Greece. By then, Demetrius had gained enough military experience and quickly captured Athens in 307 BC, driving out Cassander's governor and declaring Athens liberated. Subsequently, Demetrius turned his attention towards Ptolemy, who was quietly expanding into the Aegean Sea and Cyprus. In 306 BC, he defeated Ptolemy's fleet at the Battle of Salamis, avenging the previous coalition attack. Following this victory, Antigonus and Demetrius chose to no longer maintain the already defunct Alexander Empire and began officially declaring themselves kings. Soon after, other successors followed suit. Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander all declared themselves kings as well, completely ending any possibility of empire unification. With continuous military victories, Antigonus and Demetrius were at the peak of their power. They continued to send forces into Egypt and various parts of Greece. Eventually, Cassander was the first to buckle under pressure and suggested reforming an Antigonid alliance. Thus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, Cassander, and Seleucus, the four great kings, strategically united once again to encircle Antigonus. Quickly, Cassander moved south from Macedonia to harass Greece, countering Demetrius' advances. Lysimachus invaded northwestern Asia Minor, occupying coastal cities. Ptolemy seized the opportunity to invade Syria and occupy Jerusalem and Phoenicia. Seleucus advanced westward along the Euphrates River. Thus, Antigonus was surrounded on all sides by his enemies. In 301 BC, the decisive battle between Antigonus and his son Demetrius against the four great kings took place in Epousos of Asia Minor. Four kings fought simultaneously on the battlefield. Antigonus' side was led by Antigonus and Demetrius, while Lysimachus and Seleucus commanded the Antigonid alliance. Although Ptolemy and Cassander didn't personally join, their armies were present. Both sides mobilized over 160,000 troops for this battle. At the start of the war, Demetrius' right-wing cavalry gained an advantage and initially pushed back Lysimachus' forces, but due to pursuing too far, his father's main army was left unsupported. Seleucus quickly used a large number of elephants to block Demetrius' retreat route, isolating Antigonus' central army, which suffered a crushing defeat. In the end, 81-year-old Antigonus died on the battlefield. Demetrius tightly led the remnants of his army to escape. He retreated to Greece, helplessly watching Lysimachus and Seleucus divide up his territories in Asia. Back then, he was a hero and a good man, almost reviving the empire's glory. Now, however, he was bullied into losing everything by others. Demetrius naturally could swallow this humiliation, but he knew very well that with most of his territory lost, survival was the top priority. So he married off his daughter to Seleucus, who could be his father in age, and himself wedded Ptolemy's daughter. Then, barely surviving, he began rebuilding his strength, waiting for an opportunity. Finally, the time came. In 297 BC, Cassander died, and his eldest son, Philip IV, also passed away shortly after ascending to the throne. Thus, the Macedonian crown fell upon his younger brother Antipater I. However, this Antipater I, as soon as he ascended the throne, killed his own mother because he felt she loved his brother more than him. This made Alexander the warrior unhappy and rebelled against Antipater I, driving him out of Macedonia. To reclaim the throne, Antipater I sought help from Demetrius and King Pyrrhus of Epirus. As expected, Demetrius didn't disappoint, defeating Alexander the warrior. Yet he didn't return the throne to his boss, but instead exiled him, taking over as king himself. From previous stories, we can see that Demetrius was just like his father Antigonus, extremely arrogant people who were previously defeated by the four great kings due to their excessive ambition. As they say, it is hard to change one's nature, so after becoming king of Macedonia, Demetrius once again became overbearing and soon faced opposition from nobles. Thus, before he could even settle into his throne, in 288 BC, Lysimachus and Pyrrhus joined forces to expel him. However, the ousted Demetrius still wasn't content and sought refuge with Seleucus, who was old enough to be his father-in-law, hoping for military support to reclaim his throne. But how could Seleucus harm himself by helping? He simply imprisoned Demetrius instead. Thus, after years of scrambling, Demetrius finally died in prison in 283 BC. With the Antigonus line weakened, Ptolemy in Egypt also turned inward rather than expanding further, shifting focus to internal development. The stage was set for a showdown between Lysimachus and Seleucus, two former comrades, in arms under Alexander the Great, who had once united against Antigonus, but now became enemies. In 282 BC, Seleucus declared war on Lysimachus over a fabricated pretext. In 281 BC, their armies clashed at the Cyprian plain, both leaders being elderly veterans of many battles with similar strength, but Seleucus had elephants, giving him an edge and securing victory. Lysimachus died in battle, leaving Seleucus as the ultimate victor among the successors. Yet another twist came when Ptolemy's son, Cronus, assassinated Seleucus on his way to Macedonia. Cronus then took over Macedonia, while Seleucus' empire passed to Antiochus I. But just after Cronus ascended the throne, he was defeated by Gauls invading from the south. Who drove out these Gauls? It turned out to be Demetrius, son Antigonus II. After becoming king of Macedonia, Antigonus II learned from his father and grandfather's mistakes, no longer acting recklessly, but instead stabilizing Macedonia and controlling Greece through diplomacy and marriage alliances with neighboring powers. Thus, as various factions stabilized, the successor wars finally concluded after over 40 years of conflict, the longest power struggle in the Hellenistic era. Despite its brutality and bloodshed, it ushered in a glorious chapter of ancient Greek history, the dawn of the Hellenistic age. During this period, each kingdom established Greek-style capitals. Greek became the lingua franca across the Mediterranean and Central Asia, blending Greek religion, aesthetics, cities, politics with Eastern traditions to form hybrid cultures. Rulers competed to sponsor philosophers, poets, artists, leading to unprecedented prosperity in science and art. So while Alexander's empire fragmented, Greek civilization spread further than ever before.